All right, we're gonna try this again. I'm not sure what's happening there at the Wi-Fi, so I apologize if you were joining us a few minutes ago. But welcome back to a full weekend of virtual programming. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. And I'm very glad to be bringing you, again, a full week of virtual programming. We'll begin here on Tuesday and conclude for the week on Saturday. At 10 a.m., we will be bringing you into our archives and be discussing some piece of our collections that helps tell the story of Bald Island. And then in the afternoon at 2 o'clock, we will be bringing you out into the field for an edition of Touring with Travis, taking you to a location on Bald Island, giving you a little slice of the island, and discuss the history of that specific location on the island. Now, as I dig into the material, as always, we'd love to hear from you out there. Making this very interactive and being chatty is in all of our best interests. It makes it a little more animated of a program. On Saturday, y'all were great. Man, Saturday I went over, I think I just talked for an hour on Saturday morning because y'all had some great questions and some great feedback. So let's continue that. I see Michelle. Good morning, Michelle. It is great to hear from you this morning. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. So yeah, give us a shout out there. Let us know where you're listening from. Let us know what your connection to Bald Island is. And if you'd like us to elaborate or have any questions, we'd love to hear those as well. So I brought out this morning what I call the Cyrus Brooks letter. It was written by Cyrus Brooks, who was a private in the 3rd North Carolina Heavy Artillery, and he served here on Bald Island during the American Civil War. Now, this letter is dated April 17th, 1864, which is about 6 months or so, a little more, give or take, when after the Confederates begin occupying Bald Island, and through the impressment of enslaved workers and perhaps some enslaved indigenous peoples from Columbus and Robeson County, they began constructing what we call Fort Holmes, this massive earthenwork fortification that was roughly 1.7 miles long that encompassed or encircled Old Baldy Lighthouse. And Cyrus Brooks was one of the many soldiers. He had about 1,100 to 1,200 counterparts that served with him here at Fort Holmes. And this is one of the only original letters that we have from this era, and he's writing to R.B. Paschal. We're not sure where Mr. Paschal is. We're not sure where Cyrus Brooks is. We have not gotten to the bottom of all that research. As you know, everything is ongoing here at a museum. With our small staff, myself and McCallie Gibbons, we're constantly uncovering new details about our collections. But what we do know is, again, he's writing from Fort Holmes or Bald Island as he addresses it here up top. And there's a lot to unpack from this letter. It's chock full of context and clues about the lifestyle, about the soldiers, and what they faced, and the hardships that they faced, the sacrifices they gave for service in the Confederate Army. And after I discuss this letter, I'm going to dive into one of Mr. Brooks's counterparts, who's named Charles Banson. We have way more letters left behind that Charles Banson wrote from Bald Island, and Mr. Banson's letters will help illuminate some of the details that Cyrus Brooks either forgets or doesn't have time to write down in his letter. Patty, good morning from Missouri. Great looking t-shirt. Absolutely. Well, I couldn't have paid you any more money to do that, Patty. I've been told to start kind of talking about our summer events. And this is our Run for the Light. It's our annual 5K, 10K that is held over National Lighthouse Weekend in early August here on Bald Island. And all the proceeds go towards the Preservation Fund, or the mission of the Old Baldy Foundation. And it is one of, I used to be a runner. I don't know if I can say that I'm a runner anymore, because I don't really run that much anymore. I guess I'm getting old. But what is really awesome about this event, and I've not heard any events like it, is that it occurs at dusk. So, Patty, you are beginning your run, your 5K or your 10K, or your 1 mile fun run. You're beginning it at Old Baldy Lighthouse as the sun is beginning to set. And by the time that you finish, it is dark on the island. And everybody gets a headlight that they put in their goodie bag. You put your headlight on, so by the end, you're running towards the light of Old Baldy Lighthouse. It's a really unique race, and it'll be in early August this year. And you can go to our website, oldbaldy.org, for more information and more details. And registration's already open. Runners know out there that the earlier you register for a race, the bigger the discount you get. So that occurs again over National Lighthouse Weekend. But back to our collections with the Brooks letter. Let me just begin reading here. So he says, Mr. R.B. Peschel, Dear Sir, as I have first leisure moments to drop you a few lines, not that I've had anything to say that might interest you in the realm of news, but simply to let you know that I have not forgotten you. When I was at home on furlough, I had intended on visiting you, but my furlough was very short and I was very sick all the time. I was at home, which deprived me of giving the chance also from visiting my relatives and friends at all the same time as your daughter and mother. And I said nothing to her in regard to you or your family, simply that that my general health was okay, and for the reason that I had such a brief visit that my health began declining. So furloughs were opportunities that soldiers, both North and South, you flatter me, Mackie. By the time I finish the race, I'll see the sunrise. hey, the light will still come in handy, Mackie. Good morning, Mackie. It's great to hear from you. Mimi, good morning. Janie, good morning. It's good to hear from you. So a furlough was when Confederate soldiers had an opportunity to leave the lines, to leave the front line or wherever their regiment or a larger entity such as a brigade or division was placed, and they had an opportunity to go home. Now, furloughs became increasingly rare as the Civil War went on. In the beginning, in fact, in 1861, when the first Confederate armies, which were largely volunteer in 1861, when they were trying to entice Confederate soldiers to re-enlist for either a 3-year service or for the remainder of the war, they passed a bounty and a furlough act that gave Confederate soldiers widely allowed Confederate soldiers to go out on furlough. But that was in the beginning of the war, and that Furlough and Bounty Act caused significant disruptions to the morale of the Army, to the discipline of the Army, and as attrition occurred, as Confederate soldiers died on the front lines and could not be replaced by other soldiers, furloughs became increasingly rare because the danger of having an amount of your troops or a number of your troops back home and then a battle occurs would not be advisable. And it's interesting that he's writing on April 17th, 1864, so he's back on Bald Head Island by April. So that means his furlough would have been in the previous weeks or months, and that makes sense that soldiers would most often have their furloughs in the winter months because typically there was a battle season. The battle seasons were during the warmer months when armies could move around easier, that fighting was easier. There are certainly a number of Civil War battles that occur during the winter months, but most typically the fighting winds down and soldiers and armies go into their winter barracks It occurred in wars that are not just the Civil War. Think of Valley Forge during the American Revolution, or Morristown in northern New Jersey. Those were winter installations where the fighting ceased and the soldiers went into camp. So it makes sense that Cyrus Brooks would have this furlough in the very, very early spring or late winter. Well, he says he was sick on the majority of his furlough, and that prevented him from visiting this friend, Mr. Paschal. And he doesn't give us any clues about the sickness, but we do know that there was a rampant disease, not only here at Fort Holmes and Bald Head Island during the Civil War, but in a widespread throughout armies north and south. In fact, nearly 2/3 of soldiers in the American Civil War died from disease rather than battle wounds. And it is because, and it's very, very much in tune with what's going on in the world today, these soldiers did not understand bacteria, they did not understand organisms, they did not understand what it meant to get infected. They did not know where the infections and where disease were coming from. So sanitary conditions were improving during the Civil War, but are no means by our 21st century standards. They didn't know what germs were. They were beginning to have inklings of germs and disease, but it was not a widespread universal thought, and that prevented these soldiers from, let's say, washing their hands after they used the latrine. Or doctors, they would not sanitize themselves in between visiting various patients. Civil War trails, cough, 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 from furlough at home. Maybe it's a plausible excuse to not head back to the lines. Hey, Civil War trails, it's kind of an honor that you're listening. That's really awesome. I'm a Civil War buff, and Civil War trails have led my journeys far and wide. And embarrassing enough, last week my mom's listening, so I probably shouldn't tell this story, but I ran out of gas going to one of your trail markers because I was that excited to see it. So thank you for listening. Certainly that Civil War soldiers would have used the furlough to kind of escape. And certainly as the Civil War goes on, and by the spring of 1862, when the first draft is passed in the Confederacy, and later on in the North, to provide more and more soldiers for the armies, these furloughs and bounty jumpers, folks that would enlist, receive the bounty or kind of the money that they would get, the lump sum that they would be earned for joining the armies. They would enlist in enough time to get that bounty and then desert. And many of these soldiers, once they deserted with their bounty, they would go re-enlist in another regiment, in another area that hopefully they wouldn't get recognized, and then get that bounty and then go here. But it doesn't seem like Mr. Brooks was trying to skimp out on his services, because surely he definitely returned to his station here at Fort Holmes. But so anyway, disease. So roughly 2/3 of soldiers that died in the American Civil War died from disease. And that is certainly the case here at Bald Head Island. We know of 2 instances here on Bald Head Island at Fort Holmes where these Confederate soldiers are able to fire their guns. Certainly this is heavy artillery fire with the Whitworth guns that were provided to the soldiers here, and various other cannons. Certainly not within range of rifle fire. So very little opportunity for the soldiers here to get shot and die of battle wounds. It's just as Mr. Brooks is saying. These men were not healthy at Fort Holmes. They were not healthy, and they were dying from disease. What diseases? Well, they were drinking the poor water supply and eating the poor food and dying from dysentery, which is an extreme form of diarrhea. They were getting bit by mosquitoes and dying from typhoid, malaria, yellow fever. There was a yellow fever epidemic upstream in Wilmington that killed roughly 10% of the population between August of 1862 and November of 1862, when the first frost killed off the mosquitoes that were carrying this disease. So Mr. Brooks, we know, at least in the little bit of research that we've done, we know that he survives the war, but many of his counterparts do not survive the war. Last spring, I had the honor of giving a tour. These folks get off the ferry and they say, yeah, my great-great-great-grandfather served here at Fort Holmes. And I said, oh, well, great. Tell me a little bit about him. They said, well, they don't know. We're here to see if he's here. And I said, what do you mean? And they say, well, his name was Private Nance, and he was a counterpart of Private Brooks here on Fort Holmes, and he died in 1864 of yellow fever, and he certainly isn't in the family plot back home. They were from Bladenboro. He is nowhere in the family plots out there. He's not in the public or religious cemeteries out there, so we assume that he is still here. And that's not a crazy assumption, because the amount of soldiers that died here, and also because there have been instances where soldiers' remains have been found in modern construction here on Bald Head Island. It's happened as recently as February 2010. Some soldiers and or their enslaved workers, their remains were found on the Par 7 on the golf course during the golf course remodeling that occurred in 2010. There's no reason for us to believe that there are not other bodies out there still to be uncovered during construction or during, hopefully in the future, archaeological surveys and excavations that can still occur here on the island, and then can uncover more details and perhaps locate more soldiers like Private Nance. Another one, Ambrose Hoke, who died here on Fort Holmes, and we don't know what happened to their remains. So it is not uncommon, and it does not surprise me that Cyrus Brooks is telling his friend, Mr. Paschal, I'm sorry, on my furlough or on my break or my vacation from the front lines, I was too sick to visit you. Got a little bit of comments here. All right, Sherry Lee, good morning, Sherry. Emmeline, hey, good morning, Dan and Emmeline from Earlysville. Oh, shucks, it's an honor to tune in. Keep up the good work and keep some gas in that tank. So we're trailing. Thank you. Again, the honor is all mine, so I appreciate you all listening in. And surely that was a lesson learned. The lesson was not, don't go to the plaque and the monument. The lesson was, fill your gas tank up before you do it. So it was in Upperville, I think, or Middleburg, one or the other. That's where it was. Helen, happy Tuesday from Charlotte. Without power today, but generator is powering the internet so we can continue to watch. Well, Helen, that is awesome. That is dedication right there. Helen, I know perhaps the storms yesterday got the better of you. We had a water spout that went, which is a over-the-water tornado that went right up South Beach yesterday, about 10 till 10. It was kind of wild. We were beginning to take shelter. It got extremely terrible. All of a sudden, it just happened, and we watched it on the radar. The water spout, we could not see it offshore, but on the radar, you could see where it was going, and it went straight off of South Beach. Very, very scary. So I hope that your power gets on soon out there, Helen. And Kathy, good morning, Kathy. I wonder if you all got bad storms up there in Pennsylvania yesterday. So as we continue in this letter, he talks about being with his mother. He says it was turned out in bad weather and under such circumstances. I hope you excuse me for showing little regard for you or your family, though I'm aware that you have been, living through hard times yourself, and that I hope that you can. He's basically saying, I hope that you can endure through these hard times. Continues, I should have written to you in sooner time and kept up with the letters that you have sent. because I am well aware of your regard for me and that you care very much for my health and for my safety. And he makes a promise that he will continue to keep up with our family correspondence, for I am murmured at almost every little written word from home. So he's very much looking forward to his letters. He seems to be holding on to these letters in his most dearest sense. He says, from our distant land. So we have notion to believe that he was probably home out west. Now, one last thing about furloughs before we jump into Captain Banson's letters is, remember Cyrus Brooks, let's say he's from out west. It had been extremely difficult to get back to the front lines here. He certainly would have done some of it on foot. Very likely he would have done some of it on railroad. Other than the eastern part of the state, you think of New Bern and Beaufort and Roanoke and Elizabeth City, other than those areas, North Carolina had one of the largest land masses in the Confederate South that remained under Confederate control into 1865. Over the weekend, I think it was on Sunday, I recall telling Chris that it was the it was yesterday, was the anniversary of Raleigh falling to the Union troops. So think, Raleigh fell after General Robert E. Lee surrendered his armies at Appomattox Courthouse. So North Carolina held out for a very, very long time. And as a result, our railroads were not torn up, were not damaged by constant warfare when you compare it to other sections of the Confederacy, such as Tennessee to our west or Virginia to our north. So the railroads in 1864 would have been at Cyrus Brooks's disposal in order to get back to Bald Head Island. And then you think some troops, they could at least go to the rail very close to where they were serving, but no, we're on a barrier island. And just as Bald Head Island has no bridge today, it did not have a bridge in 1864. And in fact, the railroad, if you would have used it, ended in Wilmington. So Cyrus Brooks would have had to travel downriver on a boat to get back to Bald Head Island and Fort Holmes here, where he was serving. And curious enough, he doesn't discuss this, but Mr. Brooks may have said in other letters describing his service here, he would have served, he was also known as the 3rd North Carolina Heavy Artillery, which is a synonym or it has the same meaning for the 40th North Carolina Infantry. Here at Fort Holmes, 2 units were the same, and infantrymen also were trained in heavy artillery, and the heavy artillerymen were trained in infantry tactics. It was the nature of being here at Fort Holmes, where they could be employed through use of infantry, through rifles, but also they had, these very important pieces of artillery. The Columbiads, the 32-pounders, 24-pounders, there was a Brooks rifle here, and then they had at least 1 or 2 Whitworth guns, one of the first breech-loading rifles ever employed in North America. And so there were not enough soldiers at Fort Holmes to have your infantrymen and your artillerymen. There was such a desperate need for soldiers. They had such a limited amount of men here that could serve. They needed to be able to do both things. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone is basically the idea. So, diving out of Mr. Brooks's letter, I want to go briefly here to wrap up to one of his counterparts, which is Charles Banson. And we're going to do a whole series on Charles Banson as well in the future. Why I bring Charles Banson up is because, unlike Private Brooks here, who left us behind 1 letter that we're aware of, Charles Banson left us behind a book that was published by his descendant, Sarah Chapman, who worked as a historian at Old Salem, up in Winston-Salem, which is where Charles Banson was from. And his letters are rife of material. Much of what we know about the American Civil War and the lifestyles of the soldiers here at Fort Holmes come from Charles Banson's letters. And in order to fill in a little bit about what Private Brooks's lifestyle would have been like when he returned from his furlough here in Bald Head Island at Fort Holmes, let us turn to Charles Banson to help describe what Private Brooks was returning to. You wish a description of the island, the fortifications, and now I am really a poor hand to give you an idea of the shape of the island, but refer you to a large atlas, saying his Aunt Lucy has one, I think. He says, the direct lines we have cut is 12 to 15 miles to the extreme point. He was terribly wrong in that. It was only 3 miles. We are on the point southwest of the Cape and nearest Smithville, just modern-day Southport today, across the river from Bald Head Island on the mainland. Bald Head Lighthouse is at our camp. Its height is nearly 100 feet and a very complete affair. It was built in 1819. Got that wrong too. It was built in 1817. And as strong today as when it was first erected, being composed entirely of stone, brick, iron, and glass. The lantern is said to cost $10,000 before the war. It is really a curiosity, and not only curious, but a very fine specimen of ingenuity and skillful workmanship. It was made in Paris. I am not sufficiently well versed in engineer matters to give an attempt to give you an idea of our works. And if I were, I'd hardly be right, for some evil might occur if such a description would fall into the enemy's hands. The men here have built very good log huts, roofs, floors, bunks, fireplaces, doors, and everything in better style than I have ever seen in the Confederate armies. As yet I have no quarters, but as soon as some lumber comes, I will put up a house. Our adjutant, Lieutenant J.B. Hancock, and myself will have one together. I've made a rough sketch of our house. It will be double with a passage between the rooms, likewise under the same roof. Very nice shingles are made on the island, and as we have some very good carpenters detailed, a very good job can be put up, I assure you. We have a turning lathe and some handsome bedsteads, and we have made. At present, I'm staying in one of the rooms of Colonel Hedrick's house. I likewise mess with him, and our mess consists of Colonel John Hedrick, Lieutenant Colonel George Tate, Major J.W. Holland, Lieutenant Hancock, and myself, and to that number sometimes is added Miss Lizzie Hedrick, the Colonel's wife. We live in very good style, chinaware, silver spoons, and etc., together with Grace and Colonel Tate. The garrison on this island consists of 8 companies of the 4th North Carolina Regiment of Infantry, also known as the 3rd North Carolina Heavy Artillery, and Captain William Badham's Light Battery. The regiment is sometimes called artillery, but they drill in infantry as well as artillery tactics. The companies are not crowded together, but scattered inside the works, with generally 2 companies at a place. The works extend in very nearly one continuous line and are about 1.5 miles in length. The companies are very full, all averaging about 100 men each. The discipline here is much more strict than in the Virginia armies. No one can pass outside the lines at night without the countersign. I send you an old one, and you can see how they arrange them. The water here is not very good, but it might be worse. Palmetto abounds in the greatest profusion and gives the place a very tropical appearance. The bud is dried and bleached, and then manufactured into hats. Some of the men are very great experts, and their wives, or some of whom there are a number here, as well as children, are not far behind them in skill. It really does not look like a camp to see the mechanics at work, the women washing, the children playing around, mixed up with a motley crowd of dogs and cats and hogs and chickens, old and young, great and small. We have tailors and shoemakers, brick masons and carpenters. Well, in fact, there are representatives from every mechanical and mercantile pursuit. Even one of the privates in Company C is a proprietor of the City Hotel. So, Captain Banson's letter here really gives us a really great idea of what Bald Head Island looked like, of what Private Brooks was returning to on his furlough here. Now, we do know that Private Brooks does live out the rest of the war. He applies for a pension record. That's how I know that. He applies for a pension record after the war, so he does live to see the end. Most likely, Private Brooks evacuated Bald Head Island in mid-January of 1865, when his other Confederate soldiers, as counterparts or comrades, abandoned this island as well. He most likely was ferried over to Southport or Smithville, and from there they marched roughly 13 miles northward to Fort Anderson, another sister fortification known as Fort Henderson, which was constructed on the remains of Brunswicktown, the old colonial port on the western shore of the Cape Fear River, again about 13 miles or so north of Southport. There, it is very likely that Private Brooks participated in the February of 1864 battle at Fort Anderson, and from there they retreated to a line along Town Creek, which is along 133, if you're familiar with this area. There was a small skirmish there, again most likely that Private Brooks participated in that. And most likely he crossed the river in Eagles Island in the February 20-something, 1865, right about there. He went into Wilmington and then, of course, evacuated Wilmington on February 25th, 1864. Very likely he participated in the Battle of Bentonville, the largest battle that occurred here in North Carolina and one of the last major engagements of the American Civil War. And then in late April of 1865, Private Brooks most likely surrendered at Bennett Place, which is near Durham Station, where General Joseph Johnson surrendered the remnants of the Army of the Tennessee and several other armies that formed to create his command that retreated out through Raleigh and again surrendered near Durham Station in late April of 1865. And just as he returned on his furlough, he probably walked back home, wherever he was from, where I know that Mr. Paschal and his other family members he discussed in the letter were very, very happy to see him. So I encourage you to stay tuned with the Old Baldy Foundation as we uncover more information about Private Brooks. You can find this letter, all 3 pages, and a transcript on our eHive. It is located on our website, oldbaldy.org. You can find Private Brooks' letter there, digitized for your leisure at home. Also, you can find all kinds of great Civil War artifacts and other pieces of our collection, all digitized, and you can access for the safety and comfort of your home, again, by visiting oldbaldy.org. You can also see a list of our summer events, including the Run for the Light, on our website. There's an online store on our website where you can find apparel and books and children's toys and games and puzzles, everything that is sold, or most things that are sold in our gift shop, you can find online via oldbaldy.org. And when you shop there, you are supporting a great cause to fulfill the mission of the Old Baldy Foundation, the preservation and interpretation of North Carolina's oldest standing lighthouse, and all the history that she has endured for the past 200-some years. When you support our mission by shopping on the store or supporting our events, you are continuing the research to learn more about Private Brooks and his comrades here at Fort Holmes on Bald Head Island. So as I wrap up here, I hope that you all are healthy and safe and trying to stay positive out there. I know that very lately, the past weekend, the news is starting to get good, starting to get positive. Lots of deaths, which is very alarming and distressing, and it's certainly taken effect on my mood, and I know many of our moods. It's distressing, it's discomforting, but know that we're starting to hear some positive things that are occurring with the trends and the numbers and the statistics and the models. And we are all making great sacrifices in social distancing, but it seems to be working. They're telling us that our sacrifices are not going in vain, that it is working, that we are supporting the endeavors of our healthcare workers. The hospitals are not as overwhelmed as they could have been. So hang in there, folks. We only got a little bit more to go. We will get through this. We will stay strong. I know we will. And very, very soon, we will all be back here on Bald Head Island to celebrate and learn about this history in person. So join us this afternoon at 2 o'clock for a Touring with Travis, and we'll be back the next few days with more virtual content, bringing you stories like Private Brooks. Thank you, Mimi, for listening. Shout out to Patrick, who's also watching. Hey, Patrick, it's good to hear from you. Michelle, thank you for tuning in. Civil War Trails, thank you for tuning in. You made my day, that's for sure. Kathy and Chris and McCallie and all you out there, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.